Welcome to Observation and Phenomena. We appreciate your rapt attention, and as always, thank you for offering us access to your mind.
Welcome to the Observation and Phenomena podcast. I'm Dave Leech, and I teach philosophy at a community college in California. My background is primarily in the big three of the Eastern tradition. That's Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. I teach critical thinking, ethics, and Eastern religions. My research was focused on bridging the gap between early Taoist alchemy and Socratic thinking. Happy to be here.
Wow. How to follow that. I'm Tim Brigham. I'm a Dr. Timothy Brigham, allegedly. Professor of psychology at Georgia Perimeter College. My background is cognitive experimental psychology. Historically, my interests have been in, should we say, flying saucers, UFOs, various unexplained phenomena, Fortean phenomena.
And I'm David Metcalfe, contributing editor to Reality Sandwich, The Daily Grail, The Revealer out of NYU's Center for Religion and Media. And my focus is folk traditions and parapsychology.
Yeah, so jumping right into it, David, you recently sent us a copy of an article you found during your, let's say, web travails about psi research and whether or not it's a good thing for you or us or any of the kids out there listening.
Yeah, that one's interesting because the lady's been tested. Most of the number of leading researchers, most of the big groups have tested her as well, or at least are aware of her. So her perspective is coming from a very different place than a lot of folks. She's not a public psychic, she doesn't charge money for her services or anything like that. It's basically something that's kind of plagued her. So what she's writing about in that is her experiences with researchers and taking into account how it's affected her, in her life. One of the interesting things she brings up is the travel that's necessary, where you're pulling a normal person out of their home, and then they've got to go however many thousands of miles to the institute and get tested.
Right.
So I thought it brought a more personal look at this kind of stuff, because you always see the skeptics writing about their the tests that they do and how people fail that, and a lot of times they're testing people who charge for their services or professional psychics, but when the parapsychologists do it, a lot of times they're testing private individuals, and there's a different sort of ethics there and a different experience, which sometimes, I don't know, in the skeptical literature, when private citizens get involved in something that's kind of more along the lines of debunking, which is something that I think was brought up in the article, that can be kind of rude to the participants, especially when the participants aren't actively participating in fraud. So.
Yeah, I hate to say, from reading the article, mention of Richard Wiseman and, who was it?
Ray Hyman.
Ray Hyman, yeah, and their alleged approach as scientists, but they're testing kind of a straw man. It's obviously not a scientific endeavor, I guess you'd say. It's more of they mentioned James $90 million challenge, but it's almost television. It's not really. It doesn't seem the approach is science, at least in that case. When she mentions her experiences with Hyman and Wiseman, it was very much.
Well, that was the girl with the X-ray eyes experience. I think her name is Natasha.
Right.
It was.
Yeah, there's something to be said, I guess, about not being at home base and feeling comfortable in your own surroundings if you're going to pull off something psi-related. But then that's also the name of the game if you want to be able to quantify it in a laboratory setting.
Yeah, and that's kind of what she was discussing that as well. I think the fact that it just changes it changes the experience for the person. And again, if it's not a performer, if it's not someone who's used to being on stage or performing like that, they're not used to flying all over the place.
Sure.
Somebody like John Edwards, for instance, he's a celebrity psychic, goes up on stage. That's his life, it's his job, that's what he does, just like somebody in a band, you know what I mean? But then you grab somebody just who's, normal day, the whatever abilities they think they have are just a part of their everyday experience, that's a totally different thing, because then you're bringing them into an environment which is totally different. And she actually speaks positively to a lot of the research, but I think what she brings up about, what the expectations are and what the actual experience is, I don't think that's talked about quite as often as it should be.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that we mentioned skeptical research, or almost as if there's a skeptical academic track and a psychology pro. It's a split of what the old believer, skeptic, very much predetermined position. People publish, in either Society for Skeptical Inquirer magazine or oftentimes at least a more parapsychological.
Well, I think that's it, is that, it's cultural. Like, Skeptic Magazine isn't written by scientists for scientists, it's written by the skeptic subculture for the skeptic subculture. So
I think you actually wanted to say septic right there, but...
Yeah, I know, that was a little Freudian slip, but, it's not... These things it's subcultural, and we're dealing with, like, cliques. We're not dealing with actual... philosophies or anything like that. We're dealing with the same thing that you deal with if you go to a Denny's on a late night. You get a subculture that hangs out and talks amongst each other and shares certain jargon, and that's not science.
Right. And I kind of ran into this problem several times, because I know, Tim, you may want to chime in here too with your approach in classes, but I teach it from a philosophical background. So with my critical thinking class, we go into, fallacies, logical contradictions, and we go into the method of science. And a lot of people, when we opened up the section that I did on psi research, either got very, very interested, and then there was a small group that just stopped going. Because, I don't know, either pushed the buttons too hard, or they that it just might be a little bit... too weird for them. And do you have that experience?
Definitely, especially in the South, and especially in Atlanta, and with the student population that I work with. That's something that is, if discussed at all, some of these topics, very, very carefully, without any. Most times, that there's no discussion of just a participation or opening the door to is a kind of a fear of. So I've heard echoed several times. I've had students that won't be in class when we actually I've shown some videos from old seance setups, and that's even just the historical aspect, even a bit taboo for them culturally.
So you haven't really tried to have in class a Philip experiment where you're all making up a particular entity and then feeding it energy and trying to levitate a table?
I have manifested a few men in black, but I'm not sure if that's related.
Right. One thing that occurred for me was I actually had John Cruff from the Rhine Center call into class, and he went over the amount of people who have gone into the dark room they have there, where they measure biophotons that come off the human body.
Right.
And the photon reads for I think maybe only 4 out of the couple hundred individuals that have gone into that room were off the charts.
Right.
And I think 3 of them had training, and one of them was born with quote unquote the gift.
Right.
And so after that, I had several students come up to me and say, wouldn't you be scared to be in a room with people who were able to shoot light off their body? And I thought about it for a little while, and I could see their concern was that it kind of breached, I guess, a cultural norm in a sense. that someone could possibly do something like this. But I said, look, they've already eliminated everyone who can bring just heat to their hands, because that's a normal human trait, via concentration and opening of capillaries and things like that. But if someone's emitting light, then 3 out of 4 times they actually have some form of training behind that. And that, to me, I think maybe rubs some people the wrong way, because we have this deep egalitarian bias where, you know, if someone can do psi, then everyone has to do psi and do it the same way. But I told my students in my class, I said, well, maybe that's true. Maybe everybody can shoot a basketball, but not everybody can be on the dream team.
Right. Which kind of gets into the article that you brought up with Drew Hempel's Qigong.
Can I mention one thing on that?
Sure.
With the emission, the light emission, that also goes kind of against a very classical notion that we've, taken on now, that we used to have this view that we emitted something from our eyes, for example, and then that, something came back in, and we actually had this, and that's a very old kind of debunked, I guess you'd say, quote unquote, view that we're emitting anything other than just being receivers of information or anything.
And passive receivers at that.
Yeah, that is true. It's interesting that when you get into this stuff to see how those things kind of correlate, because if you think about the people that were writing about emitting light from their eyes were also probably doing some kind of like Western style of training with meditation and that kind of stuff, for whatever that is within, their setting. A lot of those people were involved in, mnemonic training and art of memory and that kind of stuff, and went a lot farther with science than most scientists would go today on a personal level,
Yeah.
Like Drew Hempel. Drew Hempel went that far. He's a scientist who has plumbed the depths of these training techniques.
Yeah, as well as the web. He kind of takes, at one point he called it pre-Socratic African Taoist yoga training, which is, I guess, a pretty fair one-liner about his research interests. But, Qigong is something I think is going to become more culturally significant in the way that Tai Chi is now. Tai Chi moved into the United States probably a good 15, 20 years ago, and now you kind of just see old people in the park doing it all the time.
Right.
But Qigong is more of movement meditation from my particular understanding of it, and it's kind of it's moving a little bit more to the fore, whether it gets co-opted by more charlatans in the New Age community, or it gets co-opted by the scientific community as an alternative method of healing. That's hard to say. But he spends a lot of time talking about healing and what healing is. And for him, it seems to be more than just the conception we have of healing as vivisection. That if there's a problem with your physical body, you just cut out the problem, let it heal up, and then it's done. I think my understanding of his view of healing is that it's a little bit more holistic than that. That it takes some sort of emotional component and all that, rather than, yes, we just got it out of your body, you're okay now.
Right.
I'm trying to do little signals, by the way, so we can. But I was just going to mention that brings up something relatedly, I think, that I addressed in lecture the other day. That kind of if you think about it, the pathologizing of the entire both human medical and psychological condition. The fact that the guys like Jung and Freud were employed because they treated sickness. No one spent their time dealing with people who were healthy. They didn't get paid for that. So you have almost a Western thought, school of thought about, I guess both medically and psychologically, that it's based on sickness as how we develop our ideas about what's normal, whereas we don't really study the exceptional or even normal.
Right. Yeah, and that already kind of sets you up for a little bit of a fail, I would think. And Drew talks about something like, the double bind, being popular to understand how things could be possibly misinterpreted. But I wonder about Qigong healing being something like I guess I would call it a double result. So you're doing both Western meds and something like Qigong, and you do go into spontaneous remission. Then at what point are we willing to say that the actual cause was from the Western meds, or was the cause from the Eastern approach, or a combination of both?
You could probably test that with. You'd mentioned, I think Harvard had done some tests. Were they able to get any idea of what had happened with the energy healing stuff?
Well, Harvard just published a couple days ago their Harvard Guide to Tai Chi. Just kind of like interesting because all Tai Chi schools come out of different families in China, but
right.
This is kind of like a newer school. It's the Harvard School of Tai Chi.
From the Harvard family?
The Harvard clan, yeah, and they're certainly a clan. But they ran tests, and the author himself didn't want to say that it was actual causation, but they did notice that they had effects for people who were in groups practicing the same form of Tai Chi, who were experiencing better balance or better memory versus the cognitive decline of their same associates who had the exact same medical difficulties. So,
well, that makes sense just on a learning your body sort of way. You know what I mean? You're going to have better memory if you've got a better body map.
Yeah.
And that's going to develop. That's pretty interesting that. Yeah, what you said about the family structure. I think there's a lot of this kind of stuff. Where yoga's like that as well. You've got lineage holders. It's not just something that you pick up and kind of toss around. So it's interesting to see when it gets stripped down to kind of a practical personal technology, as opposed to these organic family things that get passed on, person to person, or you're adopted into the family as the student,
Right. Or if you even take like the metaphor of looking at something like the history of language and language transmission. So first, the original group will be speaking the culturally accepted version of a language. Then the first generation in a new land will be speaking almost like a mixture of the two, and then the third generation will be able to really handle both, speaking the original tongue,
right.
Their parents' kind of pidgin, as well as this very clear new form. So maybe that's, and if biology has anything to tell us, maybe mutation is a very natural thing, and we needed a Harvard School of Tai Chi.
Well, it's true. Yeah, that it brings it into the West. We wouldn't, in the U.S. at least, we wouldn't deal with family units.
Right. Yeah. So this article by Drew, it's pretty interesting. He kind of goes fully crazy with as many links and out there stuff as he could get into, but he does talk about John Chang, and John Chang is the Magus of Java, who's a reputable master of mixing yin and yang within the body to create some electrical effect. His quote-unquote top student who wrote the book, Magus of Java, had a blog post about a year or two ago where he said, look, everybody stop emailing me to find out what John Chang's email is and find out what his meditation technique is so you can shoot electrical bolts out of your hands like the Emperor yourself. Start focusing not on being immortal, but what may happen when the social issues that are in place right now bring the entire edifice down. So he was worried more about, in a way, a social outgrowth of Qigong studies. Yeah, you may have some physical perfection exercises, but you got to watch out for if there's going to be food on your plate and stuff like that too. So I thought that was kind of interesting that some guy went to the top of Mount Olympus, met some master who could levitate off the ground, and then went into talking about social collapse.
Right. Well, I mean, you find that though. I mean, in the, in yoga, and that the cities and the powers that are associated with advanced meditation techniques are always rejected in themselves. Is merely a side effect of a greater consciousness that eventually leads to, a social consciousness of some sort.
Right.
I thought it was interesting that you said people were, barraging for email for, I want the immediate, direct way to be an ascended master with no work whatsoever. Like Robert Anton Wilson in some of his books said, the exercises are there and you can say you did them, but if you don't do them, you're not, people want to skip past the actual work that seems to be possibly, essential, I guess you might say, for some of these things, that you can't just get the Cliff Notes version of.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that goes into what, in Drew's article, one of the things that Drew does is make really bold claims.
Sure.
About,
Beautiful.
superhuman abilities and that kind of thing. And that, I think that what you said, Tim, kind of ties into that, because it's, that's a physical change that we're not willing to accept. We're willing to accept that yoga might make you feel better and, get you up in the morning and increase your circulation or something like that. But to go farther with it and actually accept that it brings you into some kind of, almost post what we consider human state, that's hard for us to do. But that's actually judging it by the physical effect, and actually judging it as a reality as opposed to just some kind of metaphor or something like that, which is where if you think about training or building a muscle, that would make sense if it's possible that it would require, work to do as opposed to just bursting into chi energy,
Light
fire,
flowing out of you,
lightning just shooting. Although that happens too. I mean, there's spontaneous cases in parapsychology where you have very odd reports of that kind of phenomena. So,
yeah,
some get lucky, I guess.
Yeah. Because I remember prior to John Kruth dialing in, he had mentioned to me that basically when it comes down to it, stuff like psi fields, like at least the Rhine Center's idea right now is that it's always existing. It's always there. It's just whether or not you're tuned into it. And moments of being tuned in can be spontaneous, like there could be just an adequately lower ego shield, and all of a sudden, boom, it just kind of pops in there. Or you can have your defenses all the way up, and you're just going to barrel through life, damn the torpedoes, and, nothing's going to get in there. So, there's a play on that, and I think that might be a tough thing to manage, because you would have to look at yourself fairly directly and whether or not you have yourself a lot of armoring. Because that's the way I always look at these type of things, that, okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say something like this is real.
Did you use Reichian armor term there? Was that the Reichian armor term?
Yeah. No, I'm actually sitting on an orgone blanket right now, and it's...
I'm working on an orgone buster and a cloud, a cloud buster's already in the way.
Oh, you're going to get shut down, man. The cops will come...
My books as soon as we finish writing them.
Oh, okay. Well, I heard Metcalfe was building a Tesla tower, but...
Yeah, that's been held back by different life situations, but eventually, once I get settled in, I mean, you got to have the Tesla tower, because how do you protect yourself from the ether ships?
Yeah.
I mean, really, you got to think defense. Think defensively with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We have to move us that way. I mean, we have to look out for Monkey Boy too, right, Tim?
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect example of oddness that may be true, but because of its physical, the claims to its physical reality make it very difficult to, kind of look at objectively. So there's monkey people, Tim, that are.
Well, that's going back to the monkey man attacks, which I just saw I guess now it's been 10 years ago in Delhi, New Delhi, the slums, the ghettos, people were actually being trampled, running away from this creature, which was some kind of monkey man. It seems to tie into Harriman, the idea. But people were actually falling off of, sleeping on rooftops, rolling off, and then scream, being trampled, fall. There were injuries and people just being crushed. And someone yells "Monkey Man," and thousands of people start running. And I looked at and again, this is a bit of an older case. I've got a possibly related newer one, but did you guys see that the drawing of what the Monkey Man looked like?
Yeah.
Two versions. One was wearing a police uniform.
Yeah. Kind of looked like my cousin.
And I noticed one of the kids who was 8 actually brought up an angle that reminded me of Spring Heel Jack. He actually brought in that the Monkey Man has springs in his shoes, and that's how he's able to jump and get away from.
That's where this stuff gets interesting, though, is because you've got all these, there's the Monkey Man's not an isolated thing. It sounds silly, focused through, the cultural language of it's a monkey man, but there's little hairy creature things that show up in different places as well. There was that newer case with the Rangers.
Yeah, we've got the pygmies in Indonesia in the national forest, Wakambas National Park, where they say several of the National Forest Rangers have spotted pygmies and apparently 15 or so pygmies who were, they gave something, I think it was 20, let's see, it was something like 2 feet tall, I think, max, without going into meters here, dreadlocks, no clothes, and some of their best rangers have, now they're actually speculating about, wow, why are the pygmies here? Are they here looking for food? Or they set up night vision equipment now to capture pygmies so that scientists can come and track them and learn about them and welcome them to, wow. So, manifestations of strange and unusual, should we say creatures or entities? I don't know.
That's my question with the manifestation thing is, what does this, let's saying it's not an actual monkey man or pygmy, what does it say about the collective consciousness of the society that's the experience that they're having?
Right.
Like there were cases of possession at a school in Jamaica, and I think the second news report in the Jamaica Star, I believe it was, had that one of the signs of possession was that the students were speaking in an African language. And, trance channeling and possession and that go in Jamaican history pretty far back as being political tools. So what exactly is going on with the cultural identity when you see these things cropping up,
I'd like to see someone has hopefully done some comparisons on channeling from UFO contactees and compared that to spiritual mediums and so forth. I'd like to see what there are some at least obvious similarities on the surface level of change and political and social structure being emphasized.
Right.
But I'd like to see kind of a content analogy. Do these space brothers give the same message that the dead do?
There's a couple books on that, actually. I think John Climo's book Channeling goes into that. Alan Greenfeld's done some stuff on it. And Arthur Hastings has a book on channeling, but I don't think he deals with the UFO channeling stuff in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
Alan Greenfeld, who, by the way, is anxious to be on Observation Phenomena in an upcoming episode.
And I think that's also going back to the whole social thing. When teaching some of the 18, 19, 20-year-old students that I have, they're often roll their eyes when I talk about guys like Anton Wilson or Bucky Fuller or something like that. I'll bring up some pretty wild ideas from back in the past, and they'll think of it as just kind of wild-eyed idealism or something that doesn't really speak to them. And I think some of it's because they don't want to be fooled again with the way their grandparents were, because the revolution, quote unquote, never really panned out into the age of Aquarius as people thought it was going to. And
right.
I think that's a bit of a cultural hangover that still kind of casts its shadow on psi research and 14 phenomena research today.
Well, I think that it's I think that's very true. I think that doesn't look at the. I don't see why people get so emotional over it. I guess it's I mean, because it is an exploration, and like we were talking about earlier, that idea of work. You know what I mean? You do have to, even scholarship, and that takes work. And
yeah.
The tolerance of ambiguity is not humans' strong suit. I don't think in any way, shape, or form. People just can't tolerate not knowing an answer, and they'll latch onto one and then stick with it at all costs.
Absolutely, Tim.
Well, and I think too, like the that tolerance of ambiguity with teachers as well. None of those guys were perfect, but they had techniques, they had practices that can be learned from. And really, what do they have to do with us? Other than sharing their stories and sharing their experiences, I don't see why people feel the need to either hold these guys up as, heroic leaders or debased enemies, or just ignore. I mean, they're other people in the world who've had experiences that can share that, and we can learn from them,
Sure.
I think we've lost that sense in trying to find, these.
Well, some of it, to me at least, comes from being able to manage an actual dialogue, because oftentimes it seems in the got-ya politics of this day that you have to have your idea and you have to push your idea through without listening to the other guy's potentially good points. And I think it was an Aristotelian notion that an educated person would be able to hold several conflicting ideas in their mind at the same time. And that would allow for dialogue, or at least an irrational approach, wherever use that may be, to talking about liminal ideas or experiences.
It's interesting that you said irrational, because I think that's something that we, knowing the roots of words and that kind of stuff, you got the idea of rational, which is ratio.
Yeah.
Well, the way that you can hold competing ideas in your head is by understanding the ratios of those ideas in relationship to each other. So it's actually a more rational form of thinking or requires a deeper sort of rationality, than the idea of what, calling it irrational really speaks to. Because irrational would simply mean that the ratios aren't apparent. They're not apparently there. But the more you learn that kind of relationship and work with those relationships, those ratios develop, organically out of the ideas. And that's, as opposed to focusing on the end result, focusing on the relationship and the ratio allows you to work within that without, falling into.
And I think some of the popular, going again back to Bob Wilson, some of the kind of popular brainwashing involves stuff like trying to take on, competing points of view. The one day I'll be a white supremacist, and the next day I'll be a ACLU supporter. And I'll try to actually believe that for 2 hours a day, and hold the actually start to get a handle on dealing with alternate points of view, and actually having some, I don't want to say empathy, which might put a different connotation on what I mean, but
yeah.
Just an actual understanding of what the ideas are to grasp it from the and to not be locked into any one dogmatic point of view, obviously.
Yeah, because dogma leads to witch hunts, which our witch hunt for this episode, is a good example of that on both sides, and actually goes into the issue of cultural skepticism. E-Skeptic ran a piece on witch hunts in Africa, and it was amazing the callousness of the author, who said something like, they didn't want to leave because they wanted to see violence. That's terrible. I can't even believe that got past an editor, let alone
a human being.
Yeah, I mean, a human being, and it's in a situation where the journalist is watching someone who's about to be lynched.
Yeah.
And he's standing there, and literally writes, I wanted to see violence. And I sent an email to eSkeptic, and their response was, well, I thought that he meant that he wanted to get the most, the most journalistic observation that he could out of that situation. What if somebody's about to be
flattering, in other words?
Yeah. I mean, that's a human being, and then at the end of it, the article ends with how interesting, how bizarre, and that, the focus on this idea of
how bizarre that you were waiting there for blood.
Without for someone to get killed, and then the reason that I think that this happened was because the article was framed from a point of view of, is witchcraft real? Is it not real? Is it a superstition? Is this just stupid peasants that don't know any better?
And almost do they need to be punished for?
Yeah, exactly, for their ignorance, and so it doesn't address the fact that, I mean, first of all, you have a situation where there's actual witch hunts going on, where people believe there's witchcraft, has nothing to do with superstition. It's social breakdown. You no longer have a traditional society that can maintain the culture. And so you have these ideas of witchcraft and all that, cracking through. And it's, the same thing happened to the U.S. with the Satanic Panic. When we started to see, when you see economic and social unrest, when you start to see a breakdown of systems, you get witchcraft claims.
Sure.
In whatever form they are, whether it's communists or, witches or whatever, they all can give you the evil eye. They all ruin your life. They all ruin your crops. That kind of stuff. It's the same thing. So, to focus on this, whether or not it's real that they can actually do, magic spells and that, in a situation where you're obviously in a society that no longer has a central core, and you're standing there watching somebody about to be lynched, I think that, people need to get a new perspective on what they're looking at in these situations, because it's, if that's the article that came out of that experience, that's horrible and a complete lack of journalistic integrity, because that's not what the story was about,
Yeah. Part of it, too, is there is an implicit cultural denial of the importance of the imagination. And that runs through, I think, a thread of all the pieces that we've been talking about today. The imaginal being elevated to a real and actual thing that people can access and use successfully in their own kind of dealings with the world. And, sometimes it does cross over into some negative social areas, but to deny it validity altogether, it can lead to some really bad stuff in the first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in that because the denial leads to missing, actually looking towards what the actual causes are, which they don't have to be supernatural. I mean, most stuff isn't, and nothing is supernatural. Everything is natural, but, it doesn't even have to be anomalous,
Right. To some degree, I think that's maybe the shared, one of the common features that a lot of these different phenomena, they pose a challenge to us to make us both think differently and think about each other differently, and to be able to steal the line, a challenge to science, a challenge to human. The more that we have to stretch our brains to try to wrap around phenomena and people's experiences of them, the more I think we're going. It's to go back to that idea. It's kicking ourselves in the pants to get us to move forward.
Right. And we're trying to move the conversation forward and on observation and phenomena. And one of the tools that we're doing this sequence of articles we're talking about is we're kind of using, divinatory tools. The sequence of today's talk was actually predetermined, possibly, by a reading of the I Ching. And that's an ancient, of course, Chinese divinatory tool, but I consulted it to see who would go first and who would go second and who would go last, and what would come of each one of us doing it first, second, or last, and came up with a fairly good combination. I guess we can share on the site a little bit later. It would probably take a little bit more for me to go into, but...
and also, I'd like to throw out there the idea that if we keep doing this in the future, we do things like possibly try to influence some random choice of envelopes.
You're right.
Just to screw, just to see.
Put them up to my forehead. See if I can read through it, just like the old Johnny Carson. No, what we got was Hexagram 49, Skinning and Revolution.
Nicely done.
Yeah, the key words were strip away the old, revolt, and renew. Skinning and Revolution describes your situation in terms of stripping away the protective cover. The way to deal with it is to radically change and renew the way things are presented. Eliminate what has grown old and useless so that then you can be seen. You must wait for the right moment to act, when the snake is ready to shed its skin and the sun is approaching the zenith. When the right moment arrives, act with confidence. You will be linked to the spirits and they will carry you through. This begins a whole new cycle of time. All your doubts and sorrows will be extinguished. That is Hexagram 49, Revolution or Revolt. And that is the theme, I guess, of this sequence of events on this podcast.
Excellent. That was well determined. And we will, on our next show, be using a different divinatory technique. So we'll discover what we use next time and what that reveals to us about.
I think I'll use a random number generator, and we'll see if we can influence something.
Well, that's part of the deal with the divinatory techniques is we each have to draw from our specialties. So Dave's drawing from Eastern traditions. I'll be drawing from folk traditions. And we're expecting you to come through with Persinger God Helmet, precogs, and random number generator.
I have a nice office here at home now, and a large enough closet to possibly, with some shielding, we could have an isolation chamber.
I could see it already because I'm RVing your house right now.
Yeah, plus I've got the camera on. That doesn't help. That doesn't hurt.
Oh.
You close us out, Leech.
Well, for the Observation Podcast, I'm David Leech. Tune in next week and we'll have a special guest. I'd like to thank Tim and David.
Thanks, Dave. It was great to join you in conversation here, and looking forward to our next chat.
Tim Brigham signing off. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll have on Brandy Schillis, some other interesting guests that you won't see here or see in other places. Until then, watch the skies.